Dark clouds rolled across northern France in the summer of 1944, carrying with them the low thunder of distant engines. The Luftwaffe's remaining fighter wings were battered, exhausted, and shrinking by the day. Allied bombers roared across the sky almost unhindered, escorted by American aircraft whose performance German pilots could hardly believe. Among the men ordered to find a weakness, any weakness, was Adolf Galland, one of the most experienced aces the Third Reich had ever produced. But on a quiet airfield hidden among pine trees and camouflage nets, a strange silhouette sat alone. Its wide belly, heavy frame, and unusually large propeller looked nothing like the slender, predatory shapes of German fighters. Its wings were thick, almost brutish. Its fuselage was solid metal from nose to tail. To some Luftwaffe officers, it looked more like a flying tank than a fighter. It was a captured American P-47 Thunderbolt, rough, heavy, and unlike anything German engineers had ever built. The Thunderbolt had been forced down weeks earlier, landing mostly intact after its pilot bailed out. German recovery crews had swarmed over it immediately, eager to examine one of the most powerful fighters the Allies possessed. Engineers measured every surface, every panel, every cable. Intelligence officers wrote dozens of reports, comparing it to their Bf-109s, FW-190s, and the experimental aircraft sitting on drafting tables across the Reich. But paper and diagrams could only reveal so much. Someone needed to test it in the air. Someone needed to push it to the edge of its limits and beyond. Galland had flown nearly every fighter the Luftwaffe produced, from early Bf-109 prototypes to the jet-powered Me-262. Now, standing before the captured Thunderbolt, he felt something unusual. Curiosity mixed with a hint of disbelief. The aircraft looked too heavy, too bulky, too slow to be the deadly machine Allied pilots boasted about. A fighter that could outrun German interceptors at altitude, outdive them in a chase, and sustain immense punishment seemed like a fantasy. But every returning Luftwaffe pilot told the same story. The Thunderbolt drops from the sky like a stone. We can't follow. If we try, our wings shudder. Our controls freeze. We break apart before they do. Galland wanted to know if these rumors were true, or if they were simply excuses whispered by inexperienced pilots facing an overwhelming enemy. As mechanics fueled the Thunderbolt with captured aviation fuel, Galland circled the aircraft slowly. His gloved hand brushed across the thick armor plates behind the cockpit. He examined the huge radial engine bolted to the front. It was unlike the inline engines German fighters relied on. Radials were heavy, simple, resistant to damage, and notoriously difficult to knock out. To Galland, it looked almost exaggerated in scale. He climbed into the cockpit, settling into the unfamiliar American layout. The dials were organized differently, the switches labeled in English, the stick heavier in feel. He studied each control carefully. Even as a veteran with hundreds of combat missions, flying an enemy aircraft carried risks. A single mistake, a misread gauge, or a misunderstood control could easily turn a test flight into a funeral. The ground crew stepped away, clearing the area. Galland lowered the canopy and locked it, the cockpit sealed with a metallic thud, shutting out the whispers of the mechanics. He was alone with the strange aircraft, alone with the unknown. The radial engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life with a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the metal frame. Galland felt the power immediately. Not sharp and responsive like a German fighter, but massive, steady, like a locomotive building force. He nudged the throttle forward. The Thunderbolt crawled across the grass field, heavy but confident. At full power, the aircraft surged ahead. The propeller bit into the air with a violent chop, and the whole machine trembled. He lifted the nose. The ground dropped away. For a moment, Galland simply listened to the feel of the plane in flight. The frame was stable, almost too stable, like it wanted to fly straight and strong rather than dance through tight maneuvers. But as he climbed higher, the power of the engine became more noticeable. The heavy aircraft did not slow. It kept rising, pushing upward with a force that defied its eyes. Allied pilots had called the P-47 the Jug, short for Juggernaut. Now Galland understood why. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't elegant, but it was unstoppable. As he reached altitude, he tested the controls, banking left and right. The Thunderbolt responded smoothly, its weight noticeable but not sluggish. Its wings, thicker and sturdier than German designs, held firm at high speed. This was no fragile interceptor. It was a steel hammer built for brute combat. Galland pushed the throttle farther, watching the airspeed climb. The controls stiffened, but not dangerously. The thick wings sliced through the sky. And then he prepared for the test that had brought him here, the dive. Every German pilot who had fought a Thunderbolt warned the same thing. Once a P-47 entered a dive, it was untouchable. Now it was time for Galland to discover whether that legend was true. He leveled the Thunderbolt, took a breath, and rolled the aircraft onto its back. The nose pointed toward the earth, and with a firm push, he sent the P-47 into a dive that would change his understanding of American engineering forever. The moment the Thunderbolt tipped downward, gravity seized it like a falling boulder. Air rushed against the canopy in a deafening roar as Galland tightened his grip on the control stick. The altimeter spun downward, the ground rushing up in a blur. But instead of trembling or fighting against the airflow as German fighters often did at high speed, the P-47 remained astonishingly stable. The nose did not wander. The wings did not shudder. The stick did not stiffen to the point of paralysis. It simply accelerated, smoothly, relentlessly, as if the aircraft were designed for this single violent act. Galland's heartbeat quickened. His instincts told him he was pushing the limits. German fighters like the Bf-109 or even the sturdier FW-190 became dangerously unresponsive during steep dives. Compressibility, that invisible enemy of high-speed flight, threatened to lock their controls, turning a pilot into a helpless passenger screaming toward the earth. But the Thunderbolt showed no fear. The airspeed indicator crept past the numbers German engineers considered safe. Then it pushed even further. Galland felt the force press him down into the seat as the dive steepened. The controls remained heavy but workable. The wings, those thick, muscular wings, held together without the slightest vibration. He pulled gently to test responsiveness. The Thunderbolt answered, not instantly, but confidently. It refused to become a runaway projectile. A realization struck him. This was why German pilots could not follow American Thunderbolts in a dive. If they tried, their own aircraft reached the limits of control long before the P-47 did. They risked structural failure, blackout, or total loss of control. Meanwhile, the Thunderbolt plunged freely, its dive strengthened by sheer mass and design. Galland eased back on the stick, preparing to pull out. The horizon rose, the pressure on his body increasing until he grunted with the force. Slowly, deliberately, the Thunderbolt leveled out, the engine growling like a beast denied its prey. When he finally stabilized the aircraft at low altitude, his breathing was heavy. He stared through the canopy, stunned. The rumors from frontline pilots hadn't been exaggerations. If anything, they had understated the truth. The P-47's dive strength was not only superior, it was beyond anything German engineering had managed to achieve. Galland climbed again, testing other aspects of the aircraft. Its roll rate was slower than the FW-190's, but predictable. Its high-altitude performance, powered by a turbo-supercharger system German fighters lacked, allowed it to keep climbing where Messerschmitts began to gasp for oxygen. The radial engine, bulky and inelegant at first glance, revealed its true advantage. It absorbed punishment without sacrificing power. Even with multiple cylinders shot out, a Thunderbolt could stay airborne. This was not a delicate bird of prey. It was a metal sledgehammer. As Galland continued testing, he made notes that would later shock Luftwaffe command. The American philosophy of fighter design was radically different. Where Germany pursued lightness, refinement, and tight dogfighting agility, the Americans had chosen durability, firepower, and high-speed attack potential. And the results spoke for themselves. During the war, The P-47's incredible dive capability became a signature tactic. American pilots called it the escape dive. German fighters would attempt to pursue, but the Thunderbolt simply dropped into the depths, reaching speeds German airframes could not match. Even Adolf Galland, with all his experience, understood that no amount of pilot skill could compensate for hard mechanical limits. One of the most astonishing features he noticed was the ruggedness of the Thunderbolt's construction. The airframe was built like a tank, with armor plates, massive spars, and a wide girder-like fuselage that could handle extreme stress. Galland examined the rivets, the thickness of the aluminum skin, and the structural supports. It was overbuilt by German standards. And yet that overbuild gave it unmatched strength in dives, ground attacks, and high-stress maneuvers. There were stories spreading across Allied airfields, stories of Thunderbolts returning from missions with entire cylinders missing, shrapnel lodged in their wings, or holes large enough to crawl through. But they still made it back. One pilot supposedly flew home after losing an entire chunk of his tail, landing safely and stepping out of the battered aircraft with a grin. Galland, thinking of the fragile Bf-109, felt a mixture of admiration and frustration. German aircraft were masterpieces of engineering elegance. But in the brutal reality of total war, elegance didn't always survive the battlefield. He brought the Thunderbolt back toward the test airfield, reducing throttle as the landscape rolled beneath him. The landing gear extended smoothly. The wheels touched down with a heavy thump, the aircraft settling onto the grass. When the engine finally shut down, a strange silence fell around him. Ground crew hurried toward the plane, expecting some dramatic verdict. Instead, Galland climbed out slowly, removing his flight helmet. His expression was unreadable. He ran a hand along the Thunderbolt's thick fuselage one more time. Later, over a simple wooden table inside the makeshift intelligence hut, he dictated his report. His voice carried the weight of a man forced to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. The dive strength of this aircraft, Galland said quietly, is beyond what we have achieved. Word spread through Luftwaffe circles quickly. Some refused to believe it. Others nodded grimly. They had seen the P-47's power firsthand. But no one could ignore Galland's assessment. His experience made his words impossible to dismiss. As he stepped outside, the sun dipping behind the treeline, he wondered how many more lives the Thunderbolt's unmatched dive capability would claim before the war's end, and how differently things might have turned out if Germany had built something like it. What Galland didn't yet know was that one final test, one final push of the Thunderbolt's limits, would leave him more astonished than ever. The next morning, mist clung to the airfield like a gray shroud. Galland arrived earlier than expected, long before the mechanics had even opened their tool chests. The captured P-47 sat alone on the grass, its metal skin beaded with dew. Overnight, he had replayed the flight in his mind again and again. Something still bothered him, a question he had not pushed far enough. The Thunderbolt's dive strength had impressed him, even humbled him, but he wanted to know its breaking point. He wanted to understand not just what it could do, but where it would fail. Only then could he grasp the true extent of what American engineers had created. When the mechanics arrived, they were surprised to see him already suited up, his helmet resting under his arm. He gave him a simple order. "Fuel it. Prepare it. I'm taking it up again." They hesitated. Yesterday's dive had been dangerously deep and pushing beyond that seemed reckless. But Galland's reputation left no room for argument. Within an hour, the Thunderbolt shook awake again, its radial engine thundering across the trees. Galland taxied to the end of the grass runway, paused, and then launched forward with a roar. The second flight began quietly. He climbed to altitude, higher than the day before, until the air thinned and the ground blurred beneath a blanket of haze. The Thunderbolt's turbo supercharger kept the engine breathing even at these heights, something German fighters struggled to match. Galland marveled quietly at the smoothness of the climb, steady, powerful, almost indifferent to the altitude. Then, when the altimeter reached a point few combat pilots ever dared to push, he leveled off and whispered to himself, "Let's see how far you can go." He rolled the aircraft inverted and let gravity take hold. The Thunderbolt dropped like a meteor. Immediately, the dive became steeper, faster, more violent than the previous day. The air screamed across the canopy. The heavy frame began to tremble, not from instability, but from the sheer velocity tearing at the metal. Galland watched the airspeed indicator surge into the red. The altimeter spun like a wheel. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. Every instinct told him to pull out. But he waited. Lower, faster, deeper. The controls grew heavier. The airframe moaned under the strain, yet the plane still held together. The wings stayed firm, refusing to flutter. The tail did not shake. The stick did not lock. It pushed Galland back into his seat with a force that made his vision blur at the edges. Just when he felt the aircraft approaching the edge of its physical limits, he began the pullout. The horizon climbed violently. G-forces crushed him downward, squeezing the air from his lungs and turning the world around him into a narrowing tunnel. He clenched his teeth, muscles straining, barely able to keep consciousness. Slowly, agonizingly, the Thunderbolt responded. The dive transitioned into a shallow descent, then into level flight. Galland gasped for breath. He was alive, only because the P-47 was strong enough to survive the punishment he had forced upon it. As he steadied the aircraft, he felt a strange sensation sweep over him. Not fear, not admiration. Something deeper, a sense of inevitability. This machine, this heavy American brute, embodied a truth the Luftwaffe had tried for years to ignore. The Allies had outbuilt them. They had created aircraft so durable, so resilient, so forgiving, that even a skilled pilot like Galland could feel the difference instantly. He flew silently for several minutes, letting the ordeal settle over him. When he returned to the airfield and landed, a crowd of officers and mechanics had gathered, sensing something unusual. The Thunderbolt rolled to a stop, its massive engine idling like a sleeping beast. Galland climbed out slowly. The officers studied his face, searching for a clue. He removed his helmet, wiped a line of sweat from his brow, and took one long breath. Then he spoke 6 words that echoed through the room like a verdict. "No German fighter can match this." The officers exchanged stunned looks. Some refused to believe it. Others nodded with grim acceptance. But no one dared contradict him. Not Adolf Galland, ace of aces, inspector of fighters, the man who had flown everything Germany had ever built. In private, Galland later expanded his findings. He noted that the Thunderbolt's dive strength wasn't an accident. It was the result of deliberate engineering choices. Its thick wings, its strong spars, its oversized control surfaces, and its massive radial engine all combined to create a fighter that could survive forces German aircraft simply could not. He described the aircraft as a monster, not as an insult, but as a warning. "This fighter," he wrote, "is built to endure what our designs cannot. In a dive, it breaks every rule we have come to accept." These words circulated quietly among Germany's engineering corps, but by then, it was too late. Production lines were strained, raw materials were running out, and the war was shifting decisively in the Allies' favor. Germany could not redesign its fighters. It could not rethink its philosophy. The opportunity had passed. In the months that followed, Thunderbolts shredded ground targets, escorted bombers deep into enemy territory, and dove away from danger with absolute impunity. Luftwaffe pilots learned to respect that terrifying dive, the one Galland himself had tested, survived, and acknowledged as superior. For Galland, the experience remained etched into memory long after the war. He had flown the fastest, the lightest, and the deadliest aircraft the Luftwaffe had built. But nothing had surprised him quite like the P-47 Thunderbolt, the American beast whose dive strength he once believed exaggerated, only to discover it exceeded even the wildest rumors. And in that moment of truth high above the misty fields of France, Adolf Galland saw the future of air combat, not in fragile machines of elegant engineering, but in unstoppable juggernauts capable of surviving the impossible.